In a previous section, we wrote a function to read some stock portfolio data. And then we did some examples with data manipulation and so forth. What I'm going to do in this section is actually a practical application of doing library modules in the import statement. And to do that, I want to focus on really just kind of the problem that is being solved here more generally. So what I've got is I have this read portfolio function. It's opening a file and it's doing like CSV reading and it's doing some type conversion and some other tasks, building a list of dictionaries as a result. Just to refresh your memory on how this works, if I were to say import port, first of all, I got some scripting statements in there we'll take care of. But what you do is you can call that read portfolio function to get some data, and then you get a list of dictionaries back and I can do calculations on it. Here's the higher level question. Why do I have to write code like that? I mean, surely in the whole Python world, somebody must have written a function to read a CSV file and do some type conversion on it. And if not, why not? So what I'm going to do is actually tackle that problem of maybe generalizing this code. Like, do I have to hardwire this? Can I make this more general? And to do this, I'm going to use an interesting technique. This is going to be a little bit of exposure to some more advanced Python features, but what I'm going to do is open up the file, and then I'm going to put the CSV reader around it. These are some of the techniques that are used in the code above. So we're making a reader, and then we do some things like we get the headers out of the file. Okay, so here's the file headers. And then we get a row of data. I'm going to focus on this row for a second. Okay, so here's a row of data on the file. Now the question is, what are we doing with that row? In the code above, what I'm doing is I'm applying some type conversions to some of the columns. Maybe that can be generalized. And here's a technique that I'm going to use to generalize that. I'm going to make a Python list I'm going to call types. And I'm actually just going to specify a list of type conversions in there. This is kind of an advanced idea, but the things that I'm putting in there are basically Python's built-in functions for converting things, like int42 makes an int and float 4.2 makes a float. What I've done here is I've made a list that has those types in there. Now, what am I going to do with that? Suppose I have a row of data. One of the things that I could do is pair up the type conversion with a value using the zip function. Like I could say zip types row. Let's just print like the two things together here. What I'm doing here is you're sort of seeing a pairing. It's like, okay, str goes to AA, str goes to the date. Not really sure what to do about dates. I'm just going to leave it as a string. Int goes to 100, float goes to 32.2. I could take that one step further and maybe convert the row. Like I could say converted is equal to funct val for funct val in zip types row. And all of a sudden I get a row of data that has been converted where the types have been converted. Focus on the last two columns there. It's like they got converted from strings into an int and a float. I can take that even one step further and do things like make a dictionary where you zip things like the column headers with the value of converted. And all of a sudden I have a dictionary of converted values. This is actually a very kind of cool thing that's going on here. And the reason that it's cool is that I can use that as the basis for writing a more general library. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this port code that I wrote. I'm going to write it to a new file. I'm going to make a file called reader.py. And the whole point of this file is I'm going to make a function read CSV. We're not going to focus on a portfolio anymore. We're just going to read a CSV where you give me a file name along with some types. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a CSV with type conversion, maybe into a list of dictionaries. I'm going to take this code and generalize it. I'm actually going to keep most of the code. Maybe instead of portfolio, I'll make a list of records. Okay, we're going to come through here, get the headers. We're going to keep everything about it. But here's the trick that we're going to do. I'm going to convert the row here using that trick. I'll say row is equal to funct val for funct val in zip types row, like that. This is going to apply the type conversion. Keep the rest of it. And then instead of having this hard-coded record down here where I make a dictionary, I'll use that trick using the headers in the row. Okay, now we're going to do records append and we'll return record. What I've done here, and we'll delete the rest of that file, is I took that code that used to read a stock portfolio and I've turned it into something just way more general purpose. I'm using this idea that I could pass in a list of functions or type converters and then apply that to data more generally. Let's see if this actually works. If this works, what I should be able to do is do something like import reader, and then I should be able to say portfolio is equal to reader read CSV, where I give it a file name. And then in addition to that, I specify what the types are. So it's a string, an int, and a float. Well, it didn't crash, so that's encouraging. Let's see what the result is. And it comes back with my list of dictionaries. That is awesome. It's like I took the portfolio reader and completely generalized it into like a more useful function. This is something that's no longer tied to the idea of just stocks or holdings or anything. I can use this for lots of different problems here. So starting with that, okay, we've generalized some code. Here's how I'm going to use that back in my original program. Now that I've got a library function, I don't want to deal with all this stuff with the CSV module. I'm not interested in that anymore. In fact, maybe I don't want any of this code anymore. It's just I want to use the library that I wrote. And the way that I might do that is I do the import statement, and then I could say return, reader read CSV file name, and then I could specify what the types are. And then I'll go ahead and pass along the errors. So that extra argument, if I'm going to keep that, I guess I'll just kind of pass that along. Turns out that by doing that, I should be able to keep the code exactly the same as it was before. So if I run Python on port, still works, but I'm now using my library function. A few important things. Again, if I use the import statement, make sure that you use the name of the module when you call it. So it's reader.readCSV. If you don't do that, it's not going to work. Also, I would need to make sure that this reader code is in a location where it can be found. In this case, it's in the same directory. One final thing with this program that I'm going to fix up, this code at the bottom is really something that looks kind of like a script code. It's possible that somebody might want to use this read portfolio function all on its own. Like if somebody said import port, maybe they would want to use read portfolio. In order to make that possible, I probably want to silence this code at the bottom. So I'm going to use that main trick to do that. So I'll say if you're the main program, you can go ahead and run that. Otherwise, just work as a library function. So what's going to happen there is if somebody runs this as their main program, you'll get the output. But if they use the import statement, like import port, now you don't see that. And it lets somebody call that function from some other piece of code. So that's an example of taking code we wrote earlier, generalizing it into a library, using the import statement to load that library. You can sort of see how it's cleaned up a lot of the code that we wrote, and also an example of just writing a main program.